Thank you very much. It is a great pleasure to welcome all of you here. My name is David Stull. I'm president of the Conservatory of Music here in San Francisco. Tonight is an auspicious occasion indeed. We have with us really some of the world's great critics, I would say the world's great critics, both from our hometown here in San Francisco, from as far away as Chicago, Washington, D.C., and New York. And in fact, it is a highly ambitious task, I would say, to bring people who are typically governed by performance schedules in all of these cities into a single city. But in fact, it has happened. That has happened really because of their commitment. It's happened because this is a group of individuals as critics who came together for the first time in Oberlin around an idea that we could run an institute and thus improve classical music criticism in the United States by first of all taking a position that it mattered. This has happened in different locations around different programs, but I think what is unique about this is the compression of energy that goes into the next several days. For the students, sleep as much as you can. It won't be much. Take your vitamins. I promise you it is an intense, intense workshop. This is a partnership now. This began as a project at Oberlin, at the Oberlin Conservatory, involving students there and us bringing ensembles to that campus, which students reviewed. Now it involves performance partners of the San Francisco Symphony Orchestra. It involves San Francisco Opera. It involves the Philharmonic Baroque here in town, and also Cal Performances. All of these partnership organizations have contributed to this program. We also now have a great range of partner schools. In addition to the conservatory here, I'm pleased to say that Oberlin has sent a delegation. Where are the Oberlin students? Raise your hand. There you go. We have Yale here as well, students from Yale who've come out for this. Stanford has sent students out as well. And we also have Cal that have sent students out. There they are. Yes, it's okay to raise your hand on this side of the bridge if you're from Berkeley. It's all right. And of course, our where's our SFCM students, as a matter of fact? There they are, down in front here. The reality is this now is expanded to include these partners and these ensembles, and I think what's important about it is the message that discourse on music matters. We first started this program. One of the questions a friend of mine who is a very active and prolific performer said to me, he's like, why are you saving music criticism? And this was following a bad review, I have to say, that they had received. And then realized absolutely that it was a necessity. I think that relative to our work as performing artists, it is so important for us to have discourse about art in culture. We look back historically and investigate understanding of music. It is often critics that we return to that tell us about the history of music. This is an opportunity for us to understand music within the context of culture. And the reality is that if you ever want to test your writing skills, sit down in the space of 8 hours and try to capture a performance in 500 words or less. It is absolutely an incredibly difficult task. Art is difficult. Writing about art is also difficult. And this week, we're going to explore that reality very intensively with these students. I would also like to say that tonight, actually, this entire emergence of this program started in an office in New York years ago now, several years ago. And it began in a conversation with a gentleman who had written some features for the New York Times in the publishing business, but an absolute devotee of classical music, whose goal was to improve classical music criticism and was looking for a vehicle for doing so. And because of that, we not only had the first institute, but also the second one here in San Francisco. So ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to acknowledge and thank Stephen Rubin. Our keynote speaker this evening, when we think about artists, and often what you will see at the top of the biographies, if you often see a single clip about them, the thing that they covet most perhaps is a quote from the New York Times. Indeed, the New York Times for many years has been the vehicle through which people have engaged and come to understand a view on art or a view on artists. Tonight we have representatives from the top publications in the country that shape that perspective often of art and of artists. But this evening we have the lead critic from the New York Times to give our keynote address. Anthony Tommasini is not new to education. He taught at Emerson College in Boston and also at Wesleyan University and also at Brandeis. He's led a number of workshops. He became the staff writer for the New York Times in 1996 and was promoted to chief classical music critic in 2000. Mr. Tommasini is the author of Virgil Thompson, Composer on the Isle, which received the 1998 ASCAP Deems Taylor Award, and also Opera, a critic's guide to the 100 most important works and the best recordings. Mr. Tommasini received a Distinguished Alumnus Award from Boston University in 1998. As he said to me a few minutes ago, you're one of the few people who's persuaded me to write something other than the New York Times. I'm honored to have done so. Ladies and gentlemen, Anthony Tommasini.
Hi, thank you. I'm really honored to be here, and I thought about what I could talk about. I thought maybe I should talk about the crisis in criticism, but I thought I'd talk about the crisis in classical music and how criticism maybe can impact that. And I want to save time because I really enjoy taking questions from people, so I want to save time at the end for that. But, so in general, this talk is sort of about influence. And I did write it out. I actually wrote it all out. In 1940, Virgil Thompson arrived as the chief music critic of the New York Herald Tribune with a clear idea of how to use this platform. Musical polemics were his intent, as he explained with engaging bluntness in his 1966 autobiography. This quote, "These principles, as I understand them, engaged me to expose the philanthropic persons in control of our musical institutions for the amateurs they are, to reveal the manipulators of our musical distribution for the culturally retarded profit makers that indeed they are, and to support with all the power of my praise every artist, composer, group, or impresario whose relationship to music was straightforward, by which I mean based only on music and the sound it makes." He added, "The businessmen and amateurs, seeing what I was up to, became enemies right off." So that's a man who really intended to use his influence. For Thompson, influencing the field at large was central to the critic's job. So I was surprised that he did not really talk about this business with me when I became a critic in 1986 and started writing reviews as a freelancer for the Boston Globe. Virgil immediately took me on as a kind of student. For about 2 years, I sent him photocopies of every review of mine that the Globe ran. He would pencil in comments, and then periodically, I reported to his apartment at the Chelsea Hotel in New York for his postmortem critiques. But he mostly talked with me about my writing, not my opinions. I think he felt that the way critics used their posts was up to them. I've been thinking more than usual about how we critics can influence the field, partly because classical music is in such trouble, especially the large institutions. Yet the critics who seem to me to have the most influence practice persuasion more than polemics. A lot of the issues roiling classical music right now, issues that demand critical commentary, came together in two stories that I, along with many of you, have written about a lot in recent years. One is the slow decline and final demise in 2013 of the New York City Opera. The other, which is still in the news, is the Metropolitan Opera's production of The Death of Klinghoffer. But before I get to these topics to set up my case, let me go back a little and look at a very clear issue that many critics took on when it most mattered, the cause of contemporary music. Now, even speaking of contemporary music as a cause is indicative of the problem. Why should new music require special pleading? How can anyone who loves music not be instinctively curious about new music? Yet, until recently, I would argue, in comparison with the other arts, dance, theater, not to mention film and fiction, classical music was by far the most conservative, the most stuck on the standard repertoire. Think of this. If a repertory theater company in America had a season of 12 plays, and 4 of them, or 1/3, were new or very recent works, another 4 were 20th century works, and the final 4 were pre-20th century, that would seem a perfectly balanced offering, a season most theatergoers would find appealing. But can you imagine if a major American orchestra today had a season that was similarly divided into 1/3 new and recent works, 1/3 20th century pieces, and just 1/3 devoted to pre-20th century fare? It would seem radical. Well, things have gotten better, I think, mostly because some bold music directors like Michael Tilson Thomas here at the San Francisco Symphony, who understood that if programs were enlivened with fresh new pieces and with overlooked 20th century works, some of the more tradition-bound music lovers might flee. But those seats might just be filled by new, curious, and younger listeners. And these bracing music directors had crucial support from many critics. About whatever influence I've had in my hometown, let me say that if I played any role in the New York Philharmonic's decision to appoint Alan Gilbert as music director, I'm quite satisfied. Not everyone has been excited by Alan's work, I know, especially his interpretations of the staples. But he has been a model of an adventurous music director. The 11-day biennial that the Philharmonic spearheaded last spring may be the most ambitious project on behalf of international contemporary music that any American orchestra has attempted. And working with the ingenious director Doug Fitch, Alan Gilbert has turned Avery Fisher Hall into a makeshift opera house for innovative productions of works like Ligoti's Le Grand Macabre, Janacek's The Cunning Little Vixen, and Shifting to Dance, a double bill of Stravinsky ballets. You know, my friend Alex Ross is here, and I just am reminded that when the word was coming out, it seemed like Alan Gilbert was actually in the running. He might get it. And I saw Alex once at a concert. I said, "You think they're going to do it?" And he said, "I don't know. Maybe they'll think, if the critics like this guy so much, there must be something wrong with him." So Alex said, "Maybe we should try reverse psychology. We should say, oh, Al, he's overrated. Oh, he's going to be more, he talks a bit, he's going to be he's going to be very conventional." But, but that was the state of the Philharmonic in those days. Now, I want to get back to the two complicated stories I mentioned about the New York City Opera and the death of Klinghoffer at the Met. What have we learned? And if I dwell on these stories, I think it's because they are very instructive. Like many people in this field, I was very excited by the convocation address given by the flutist Claire Chase, a MacArthur Foundation Fellow, to the graduates of the School of Music at Northwestern University last year. A video of her talk went viral online, at least viral for classical music, deservedly. She said that, yes, every day we read about the implosion of orchestras, the winnowing of the number of jobs for an expanding workforce in music, and more. But to her, far from dying, classical music is, quote, just being born, with new performance practices that put creators, interpreters, historians, educators, theorists in the same entrepreneurial spaces. Our calling, she said, is to create positions for ourselves and others, to improvise and blow the ceiling off of anything resembling a limitation. This was heady stuff, the best statement yet made for the new entrepreneurial energy bubbling up from young musicians. Still, I was even more impressed when I spoke with Claire, and she made clear she was referring mostly to new endeavors. She admitted to being as confounded as anyone by the troubles the big institutions are grappling with. "I would not dare to suggest that I have an answer for the New York City Opera," Claire told me. As I watched the City Opera struggle, I knew that some people thought I, for one, should have an answer. I didn't. But I did have lots to say, along with many critic colleagues. So let me look back. When Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia marshaled the forces that gave birth to the City Opera in 1944 at the New York City Center, he quickly dubbed it the People's Opera, and the name stuck rightly. From the start, it was a scrappy operation, something that comes through charmingly in the 2013 memoir of the conductor Julius Rudel, titled First and Lasting Impressions. Rudel was with the company from the start and ran it from 1957 to 1979. He died this June at 93. I think my favorite story in that book, which captures the makeshift ways of the City Opera, is from 1961. Rudel was conducting Britain's The Turn of the Screw at the Cambridge Festival in Massachusetts that summer. Well, the run took place, but the festival went broke, and there was no money to pay Rudel's fee. He told them, "Look, give me the set in lieu of my fee." They did. The following spring, he presented The Turn of the Screw with that set at City Opera. It ran successfully for several additional seasons. During his tenure as director, Rudell built up an impressive resume of achievements. He began with an entire season devoted to American works. He presided over 19 world premieres, 7 American premieres, 12 New York premieres, and commissioned 12 operas, including Jack Beeson's Lizzie Borden and Ned Rorem's Miss Julie. But he was also in charge when the company left City Center in 1965 for the New York State Theater at Lincoln Center, which in retrospect may have been a bad call. For all the limitations of City Center, hardly an ideal opera house, Rudell at the time was strongly opposed to the proposal for the company to relocate at Lincoln Center. He lays out the reasons well in his book. He worried that the powerful Metropolitan Opera would have approval rights over the City Opera's repertory choices. He was sure the companies would slip into a big guy, little guy syndrome. Expenses would rise dramatically. At the time, City Center paid City Opera's utility bills and charged the company $1 a year to lease the building. City Opera would need a larger orchestra and chorus for this bigger stage and have to modify existing productions. Yet 10 pages later in this book, after the move has taken place, Rudell refers in passing to the company's glamorous quarters at the New York State Theater. So even he got caught up in the mystique of Lincoln Center. In any event, Rudell's pessimistic predictions came true for the most part. But let's skip ahead past the era of Beverly Sills and Christopher Keane to the years that Paul Kellogg ran the company. Paul is an elegant, idealistic man, and audiences and critics were supportive when he took over in 1996. That was around the time I started at the Times. I have often written and still believe that every institution, from San Francisco Conservatory to the New York Times, as well as every orchestra, opera company, and ensemble in America, should be expected to articulate a clear mission. This is what we do. This is who we are. Under Paul Kellogg, the City Opera was a model of how this is done. Its mission basically was this: you might not have heard world-famous singers and conductors at the company, but you did hear excellent, eager, often younger artists, including many Americans, who cared about being part of an ensemble where acting really mattered. City Opera ceded The Ring, Aida, and such to the Met, but its repertory was rich with rarities and recent works and new operas, particularly by American composers. And the standard repertory was presented typically in bold contemporary productions. Innovation went back in time as well. Under Paul Kellogg, the City Opera was an essential Handel house. But Paul quickly became convinced that the main problem affecting City Opera, was its location, the New York State Theater. At Lincoln Center, the People's Opera was literally in the shadow of the Metropolitan Opera House. Inevitably, it was seen not as a different kind of company, but a lesser Met. Plus, the theater was too big for productions that placed a value on acting and gave opportunities to young singers with lighter voices. Also, the acoustics were so frustrating that Paul made the controversial decision, a move I strongly criticized, of installing what was euphemistically called a sound enhancement system, thereby introducing routine amplification to an art form that for 400 years had been based on natural sound. At the time, Paul was also running the Glimmerglass Opera in Cooperstown, New York, and he thought it made sense to have the companies collaborate. A production would be developed and introduced at Glimmerglass, then eventually brought to Lincoln Center. But Glimmerglass has one of the most ideally intimate opera houses in the world, seating just 900, but with an ample stage and pit and excellent acoustics. Often, a production would open amid excitement at Glimmerglass, only to seem swallowed up once it moved to the State Theater. Paul Kellogg absolutely convinced me that the City Opera had to find its own home in New York, a New York City Glimmerglass in, say, Upper Manhattan or Chelsea or somewhere in its own neighborhood. He tried to bring this off for 10 years, but couldn't do it. His ideas included a courageous proposal. About a year after the September 11th attacks, Paul Kellogg suggested that the New York City Opera relocate to a new house at Ground Zero. This was a risky idea. That area of Manhattan had never been a cultural magnet. Would City Opera's audiences follow the company way downtown? Would new audiences from Brooklyn and New Jersey be enticed the way Paul hoped? It all became moot, though. The Lower Manhattan Development Board, fortified by a survey of community opinion in the area, questioned whether a 2,200-seat opera house might be too large, too awkward, and here's the killer, too high culture an institution for a place that was to become so important to New York's future. I wrote some strong columns supporting Kellogg's proposal and challenging the unfair perception of opera as in any way elitist. But the City Opera was rejected. Today, plans for a cultural center on that site remain utterly vague. This project has no tenants, no purpose, no mission, and now no architect, since the developers and Frank Gehry have parted ways. Excuse me. As I said, everyone in the field, like Paul, but critics, I include myself, were not paying enough attention to the yearly deficits he was accumulating. He left the company in 2007. That February, the board announced that Gérard Mortier, the controversial impresario provocateur of international opera, would become the new general director, officially with the start of the 2009 season. At first, this struck me as a wild idea. The more I thought about it, it seemed, well, a potentially exciting wild idea. I went to Paris to talk with Mortier and to check out some of the productions he was presenting at the Paris Opera, which were terrific, especially a brilliant Wozzeck staged in a modern-day army barracks. But the New York State Theater was about to undergo a major renovations, and Mortier had convinced the board to present no stage productions during the entire 2008-09 season, which seemed foolhardy. Over a dinner in Paris, I pressed Mortier about it. "You'll still have to pay the orchestra and chorus," I said. "You'll lose so much money." He answered, "We'll lose more if we put on productions." I told him and later wrote, "This made no sense to me. But hey, I'm a critic, not an opera company director. I decided to wait and see." In a way, the beginning of the end for City Opera can probably be traced to the day when Susan Baker, the head of the board, who pushed for Mortier's appointment, asked him what he needed in order to accept. During those years, the City Opera's annual budget was around $40 million, give or take a little. Mortier said he would need at least 60. Susan Baker said, "Okay." Now, as anyone who raises money for a nonprofit knows, to boost a $40 million budget by even another $1 million, while possible if everyone pitches in, is challenging. To pledge to boost a budget by 50% when there was no record of having raised such amounts seemed absurd. The 2008 recession hit. Miss Baker could only promise Mortier $36 million for his first season, and some of that, it turned out, was phantom money. So Mortier resigned in November of 2008, after the City Opera had begun its season of no staged productions. Sadly, Gérard Mortier died of cancer early this year. George Steele was brought in to run City Opera, and this is where the critical coverage of the company turned bitterly contentious. George was bright, eager, and full of ideas, but he had never run an opera house. Still, I thought he deserved a chance and everyone's goodwill. He became the biggest booster in the city of the renovated theater, which had become, as we all know too well, the David H. Koch Theater. And George put on some great shows, some of my most memorable evenings of opera, notably 2 productions directed by Christopher Alden, a revelatory staging of Bernstein's A Quiet Place, which made this work seem Bernstein's masterpiece, his most personal and original work, and a psychologically probing and sexy Don Giovanni. But after 2 seasons, this booster of the best theater in New York, as he dubbed the Koch, announced that the company was abandoning it. It was too expensive to function there. City Opera would become a roving ensemble. All of New York would be its stage, George asserted. But the move seemed less a declaration of independence than an act of desperation. Maybe I dwell on this saga because during the Steele years, I kept trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, while the orchestra and chorus, fans galore, and many critics were calling for his ouster. I really don't see how anyone else could have rescued the company by that point. But the takeaway for today, for this institute, I think, is that mission and artistic excellence are not enough. Every company has to have a pragmatic business plan that meets its mission. This is something we critics have to remember as major institutions struggle and we offer our own analyses, singling out incompetence, explaining what should have happened, and proposing solutions. That some institutions are struggling right now is not always about the larger challenges of declining interest in classical music among young people and the cluelessness of boards and music directors. Some problems are site-specific and business-driven. Take the struggling Atlanta Symphony, which is having such dismaying labor strife. The orchestra has had terrific artistic leadership under the tireless Robert Spano. But it's just one tenant at the Woodruff Arts Center and must cope with the awkward administrative oversight of the center's board. Contrast this, for example, with the Boston Symphony, which has long owned the splendid Symphony Hall, has no real competition in the city, not even a truly major opera company, and can rely on two cash cows, the eternally popular Boston Pops and that summertime crowd magnet, Tanglewood. During the labor strife at the Metropolitan Opera this summer, when Peter Gelb was threatening a work shutout and the unions were threatening to strike, I was contacted quite a bit by news outlets that wanted me to comment on the high salaries Met chorus members and orchestras received. I wouldn't go there. It's not my place to say any artist is overpaid. It depends upon what the company can bear. For me, Mr. Gelb made a convincing argument that the Met's labor costs were unsustainable and that expensive new productions were not the main source of the company's financial woes, though he now acknowledges that the number of new productions must be cut back. Still, if the compensation for the chorus and orchestra is unsustainable over time, this does not mean it is unmerited. This issue is better covered, maybe I'm ducking it, but this issue is better covered, it seems to me, by reporters as a labor dispute or a business story. And at the Times, we are lucky to have excellent arts reporters, especially Michael Cooper, whose beat is classical music and dance. But the recent issue at the Met that truly called for critics to step up, of course, is the death of Klinghoffer. This opera by John Adams with a libretto by Alice Goodman has been controversial since its 1991 premiere. But along with condemnation and protests, it has garnered widespread praise for several important productions over the years, as well as a powerful film adaptation. John Adams conducted the piece at the Juilliard School in 2009, an urgent and compelling performance that was very well received. There were no protests of any kind. Well, as you know, heated, angry protests, mostly organized by various Jewish groups in New York, drew hundreds of people to Lincoln Center who believed the opera to be anti-Semitic and denounced its creators, Peter Gelb and the Met. Many of the most indignant protesters admitted to having never seen the opera. For them, just the idea of it was insulting. As I wrote in my review when the production opened last month at the Met, it is understandable that the daughters of Leon and Marilyn Klinghoffer would feel personally aggrieved at having their father's murder be the focus of a contemporary opera. Mr. Adams and Ms. Goodman knew they would be touching raw feelings when they decided to make a ruminative opera of this horrific 1985 event. But what is art for, if not to explore the inner lives and feelings of people? Including seething grievances and irrational hatreds. I think that Klinghoffer, though flawed, is a wrenching, dark, and compelling American opera. For me, it is Adams' richest and most nuanced score. I was proud of my profession when so many thoughtful critics wrote so sensitively about the work and the issues it raised, even when I disagreed with their takes. I strongly criticized Mr. Gelb in a column after he announced that the production would proceed, but that the HD video telecast to international movie theaters would be canceled. He presented this decision as the result of a difficult compromise worked out with leaders of the Anti-Defamation League, who argued that with the rise of anti-Semitic action around the world, which is true, it was just too dangerous a time to make the opera so accessible. But by canceling the screening, the Met stigmatized the work, especially for those who don't know it, rather than allowing it to be seen, experienced, and debated. The Met missed a chance to have a teaching moment, to invite the creators, Middle East historians, and religious leaders to discuss the work publicly. And the decision may have emboldened the protesters, who thought that if Gelb would give on this, he might cancel the entire run. As it turned out, on opening night, Mr. Adams received a huge ovation from the audience, as did the cast, the chorus, the production team, and the valiant conductor, David Robertson. The death of Klinghoffer raises hugely complicated issues, but the one I want to focus on a little more as this institute begins concerns dramatizing real, recent events, especially something as shocking as the killing of a disabled elderly Jewish man who was on a cruise with his terminally ill wife by a small group of Palestinian Liberation Front hijackers. One criticism leveled at the opera, which is a fictionalized presentation of the incident, is that it gets some of the history wrong, both the distant conflicts that sparked the hijacking and the details of the takeover. Is it acceptable for a work of art to alter recent history for dramatic purposes? This is a delicate question. The distortions that result will inevitably hurt, even infuriate those involved, those in the know. But the answer to that question is, on balance, yes, it is acceptable to bend a story to artistic aims. Take some much easier examples, like the 1999 film The Insider, which is about an initially compromised report that aired on 60 Minutes about Jeffrey Wiegand, the whistleblower from the tobacco industry, who had damaging inside research results about the harmful effects of smoking. Mike Wallace, for one, was horrified over the way he was depicted in the film. Or here's another, the 2010 film The Social Network, about the founding of Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg originally considered taking some stand about the film. He decided to let it be and not really comment, though in one interview he charmingly said that he sure doesn't remember all those wild parties, just lots of all-nighters working. Now, few people question the latitude films like these take with history. But the Klinghoffer story is about a brutal murder and bitter conflicts that have gone on literally for centuries and seem unending. Still, the principle remains, I think. A work of art is meant to be an artist's take, an artist's expression. To end, let me poke a little fun at my own influence. Let me tell you an insider time story. In early 2001, In early 2001, an announcement was expected from the New York Philharmonic about the successor to Kurt Masur as music director. The orchestra, I thought, had bungled the search. It had failed to bring in some potential younger candidates to make their Philharmonic debuts. It had taken too long to get serious, and some exciting artists had already accepted appointments elsewhere. Anyway, suddenly, the name of Loren Maazel emerged as a possibility. Out of nowhere, it seemed. What makes this story a little sad, of course, is that Loren Maazel died earlier this year. Just last week, there was a memorial concert for him in New York. As I said, at the start of 2001, Maazel's name kept slipping out from the Philharmonic. So I wrote a column, a preemptive argument against Maazel. Kurt Masur had raised the standards of the orchestra and instilled needed discipline, I wrote. But under his leadership, the Philharmonic seemed a stuffy institution. A dynamo was needed, preferably someone younger, ideally an American, I thought, or at least someone with good connections to American composers and American music, someone with a vision for what a modern orchestra, especially this one, could and should be. Maazel was a formidable conductor, but too imperious, too aloof. My fear, I wrote, was that he would have no interest in being a cultural leader in New York. Why not prolong the search? Take more time. Give candidates like Kent Nagano, David Robertson, and Marin Alsop more consideration. Well, my piece, which came to be known as Tommasini's Anyone But Maazel piece, though I never used that phrase in it, appeared on January 29th, 2001. That very morning, the Philharmonic Board finalized and announced the appointment of Loren Maazel. I had to go to the office that day for some reason, I can't remember. And the culture editor told me that Joseph Lelyveld, who was then the executive editor, wanted to see me. Well, this did not happen every day. So I went to Joe's office. He was a couple minutes late, so I waited outside. Then I saw Joe walking toward me. He shouted out, "Ah, is that the all-powerful chief classical music critic of the New York Times?" And I said, "Yeah, Joe, I write a column, and these institutions quake." So that's what I have to say to you today. Thank you so much. I am done, and you have to take questions. Thank you. I love questions, and I think I'm good at it, and we have some time, so I'd be happy to take some. If anybody has anything they want to ask. Yes?
Have the Klinghoffer demonstrations continued?
They have not continued, from what really, very, very little. Few people, not so much. There was nothing, there was nothing. It was a Friday night, though. There may have been, but I hear it was. They have been. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive, but I have to think that even on opening night, I wrote my review. It was stopped twice, not long, but a couple. It had to be held up twice by shouting. But maybe I'm naive. I maybe in my heart think that even people who thought they were against it, in the face of that opera, especially that production, I think would have looked and thought, well, this is not anti-Semitic. I mean, it's just not, So maybe it quieted some people down. But anyway, I'm going back for the last performance. I still think Mark Swed, in his piece, said they should reconsider the decision and do the HD, but it's too late. It's already, all the theaters have already made other plans. It's just a pragmatic thing now. Yeah.
Would you agree that it was a bad decision to stage Klinghoffer in the first place, seeing as the Mets has such a huge, a lot of its money comes from wealthy Jewish patrons?
I don't. I think they had, it was a matter of principle. They had done John Adams' 2 other operas. They thought, why not complete it and do this one too? I think they thought, see, the thing that's very painful for John Adams is that the creators, in their heart, believe they've written this honest, brutally honest, humane piece, that looks at a horrible, event. And that's why John Adams, the guy feels that people who know nothing else about Klinghoffer and very little about his music may know, oh yeah, that's the anti-Semitic opera. And it's like tagged with that now. Once that happens, it's so hard for it to change. So I don't think, also, as I said, in 2009, it played at Juilliard. There was not a peep. I mean, the Met is different. And the groups protesting, the situation has gotten worse around the world. But you could argue that makes it exactly the time to put on this opera, not to avoid it, and see and debate it. Then it's just, these are very difficult things. But no, it's one of the best things Gelb has done in his tenure was to schedule it and go ahead. I wish the HD was going to happen. Yes. I went to Yale undergrad, and my master's of music is also at Yale. Yeah.
I have 2 kind of general questions for you. So you talk about how it's a changing, challenging time for classical music. So what do you think is the critic's role between kind of society and music and people
Right.
in this time? And also, why are we here? And why are us fellows?
Right.
I assume we're not just here to improve our writing.
Right. Yeah. Those are 2 big questions, and they're sort of separate. Let me take the second part first. Why are we all here? Well, another topic I could have talked about is the changing field of criticism. In a way, there's more criticism being written today than there ever was probably in the world. But it's on blogs and stuff. This is the challenge for a place like the Times. New production opens at the Met or a new piece at the Philharmonic. And let's say especially opera, because there's so many intense opera bloggers and opera blog sites, to put it politely, and who are not always so well disposed toward me. But So if immediately online there can be this conversation about it, what does it matter what I think? And that's the time sells authority. It says that yes, here you have me. I'm not this opera only person. I review everything in the world from old music to new music. I'm a trained pianist. That you're going to get a reasonable take on something, a critic like me tries to build up trust, tries to build up, integrity and stuff, and that's what we're selling. That if you want a person to cut through this, that's what a mainstream critic can do. But all the blogger stuff, all that stuff is great. It enlivens everything. It enlivens the discussion. And it puts me on the spot. It makes me have to work. The authority of the Times, by the way, is not anything we take for granted. It's something we have to defend every day, and it's not. It's fragile. It's easily lost. And I can tell you, if I make a tiny mistake in a review, boy, do I hear from people, about it. And but anyway, that's the answer to that. The thing of the critic's role and about the institutions, this is, I didn't go into some of the elements of it. For example, a critic, in a way, and what I just said, I am saying that critics have to think about business models and what these institutions are trying to do and what they can afford. On the other hand, on another day, you could say the Met should put on a new opera every season. I don't see why they can't do that. It costs a lot of money to put on a production of Falstaff. Why does it cost any more to put on a new opera? I don't want to hear your money woes. This is what you should do. That's an okay thing for a critic to say. You can say that, and maybe sometimes you should. The big institutions now, the problem, the world economy is changing. Places like the New York Times are learning to do more with less. Universities, same thing. More and more freelancers at the New York Times. And, I'd like to think the quality of what we do has not slipped at all. Now, apply that to arts institutions. It takes X number of people to put on Die Meistersinger. If there are 4 horns in the orchestra, you can't have 2. So it's expensive. Now, the Met could have 1/3 of its orchestra could be basically freelance contract. And now the quality would slip a little. But the truth is, it wouldn't slip as much. It wouldn't be a catastrophe. They'd still be players who are good, but that would be a huge seismic change, in what these institutions have been. So there's a lot of soul searching that has to go on about these things. And one of the things about city opera, can't New York have 2 opera companies? What's wrong with that city? Berlin, London, look at these other places. Well, maybe they can have 2 opera companies across the plaza at Lincoln Center from each other. Look at London. The English National Opera has such a different mission than the Royal Opera Covent Garden. First of all, they do everything in English. That's their mission. But they have their own house, their own neighborhood. Suppose the English National Opera for all these years had been located in Covent Garden Arts Center, right next to the Royal Opera House. I wonder if it would have been so successful. So sometimes little things like that can affect it. But so yeah, it's a complicated answer to that question. But I think as I said in the talk, I was happy that we had Michael Cooper to cover the gritty details of the Met labor strife. What do I know about it? So I just felt it was better for me to take the bigger artistic picture. Yeah. Yes.
So you mentioned that I'm Zoe Madonna. I'm a senior at Oberlin. I'm also one of the fellows.
Oh, hi.
So you mentioned at the end of the talk, and I understand jokingly, that it's the big classical music critic of the New York Times. You say something in a major institution.
Right. They don't really. It was the point of the story, but yeah, go ahead.
But it's still, even though you say how tenuous the New York Times power is, it's still the New York Times' quotes that everybody puts on top of their
Right.
advertisements. So people like, for example, me and the rest of the Rubin Fellows who might be writing on blogs or for smaller journalistic outlets, but these major institutions, do they care if we listen? Do they care if we write?
Oh, yes.
Could you paraphrase that to the audience? I don't think everybody.
Yeah. She's asking that, if the Times has all this authority and stuff, do we care? Is that what your question? Do we care? Do we pay attention to the blogs and to the other?
Pay attention
To the field.
pay attention to people.
I think, this, it's funny. Let me answer that. Let me give you a little slice of this problem. The Met Opera, to take that, has to decide who's a critic, who gets a press seat. All of a sudden, these bloggers are coming along. Is a blogger a critic? Is a blogger entitled to? The Met has been very gracious about this so far. They have said, sometimes they'll say, we can't get you in on opening night, but the second performance or whatever, we can get you in then. But now, there are more and more of these people. It's really hard but yet they know that opera, especially these opera fans, are reading these things. And but I think the coverage online and in smaller journals is being read. I think the institutions do. Because sometimes if you write exactly what some artist wants to read, that's going to go prominently on that artist's webpage or whatever. I think they do. I certainly do. The Times, also the authority, I don't mean to sound, I don't take that for granted. It's a funny thing. Okay, I'll tell this story. I don't want to mention this composer's name, though. But anyway, there was a new opera by a woman composer at New York City Opera, and it wasn't very good. And so I went to it, and I wrote a review. And typical for me, I said, well, it's a good story, good libretto. And every once in a while, something happens, and you realize she has an ear, and it's very pungent and things. But then these things happen, and she means it, I think, to be very ritualistic, and it's just kind of dreary and kind of whatever, and and it doesn't really work. And so so I write. So then Justin Davidson, who was then at the time he was at Newsday, I think. So and he's a friend and a wonderful writer. So he writes this review. It's an incredible negative review. It's funny, it's witty, it's just, you can't put it down, and he's correct. He's not incorrect, And I wrote, that's so good. So I saw Justin at something. I said, that review was so good. I just, I was trying to be careful, and he said, you have to be. And I was really appreciated hearing that. I felt like he was saying, I'm at Newsday. I'm a damn he's a Pulitzer Prize winner. He does not lack for respect and authority and in the field. But the Times is different. People really expect it to be, and that can be our curse, because we don't want to be dreary, or so. I want to, and if something I really don't like, I of course just say so. But I think I would also say, with all respect to my great friend Justin, that if you're talking about whose negative comments carried the most weight, I wouldn't be surprised if mine did. Because Justin's review was easy to think, oh, well, it's so clever, but he's just, he's just having credit. And you couldn't read when you read my review, you thought, he's trying so hard to say something good about this piece, that it really must be bad, because he's just not really, So, I don't know, that's yes?
Well, I'm a Bay Area person. I've been reading the New York Times for many years.
That's what we like to hear.
I love the quality of your writing.
Thank you.
I've been reading your reviews and many other reviewers.
Thanks.
My question is this. It seems to me reviews have at least two components, and one is an
Right.
We talked a little about history.
Right.
Then they'll give you their subjective impression.
Right.
And I think this is particularly true of your dance critics, which
Right.
I really enjoy.
Right.
And often it's about the deep feelings they get when they go to a dance. So my question for you is there a proportion that you like to see between the subjective and context? What do you look for?
That's a very good question. It's something I think about every time I write a review. There is no proportion. I mean, a review is, as you say, part opinion piece, part news report, part history/news report. What was this thing? What's at stake here? Where did it come from? Why is it being, it's not 50-50. It depends upon the event. Sometimes I have a strong opinion. Sometimes I don't have a strong. Sometimes the history is well known. Sometimes the history is not well known. So, and maybe I have a lot of work to do. If I have a strong, sometimes I choose, for example, Alfred Brendel was, when he is now retired, but he's a very distinguished pianist who didn't turn me on exactly. I respect him, but I had nothing against. When I had to review him, I usually pulled back. I didn't express my opinion so much because I seemed, who cares? I'd maybe have a little thing about what I thought was maybe a little lacking, but I think what Virgil Thompson taught me was to try to use description to get your opinion across. Just don't say it's terrible, it's awful. Describe it in a way that makes it sound terrible and awful. A review I'm very proud of was Julie Taymor's production of The Magic Flute, which I can't stand. And I was in the minority, a lot of people loved it. But to me, I just thought it was like a circus, like with all these puppets and stuff. But I just made it into I invited readers to kind of laugh at me. I'd say, I don't know, this thing looked ridiculous, all these smoking things and stuff and all this busyness. And you have Matthew Polenzani, who is Prince Tamino. He is that character, and in white face, looking like a kabuki character, like you take all his personality away from him. And I said, well, I don't know. And then I won the Kicker of the Week. Kicker is the final sentence. I won the Kicker of the Week award at the time in the culture department that week, because I said, well, at least parents whose kids are dragging them back and back to The Lion King have another Julie Taymor show in town now that they can go to. And Mozart's score beats Elton John's with a stick. But so it depends. Sometimes where this is a little bit at times where we have often big arts and leisure preview of something I'm going to review, and somebody really smart like Zach Wolf will do a really good job. It's on balance, that's really great for me, but it's a little complicating because how much I can't assume that my readers of my review have read that piece. I now I don't have to explain any of that because Zach did. But I can't explain all that stuff again, so I wind up having to devote crucial sentences to kind of regurgitating a little bit of that, because exactly what you're asking, that the history may be very important if you're going to understand my comments, but always description is the way to make your reviews come, your opinions, come through. Yes, sir.
One of your most distinguished predecessors at the Times, Harold Schoenberg,
yes,
got off the hook writing both positive and negative things in the same review, using frequently the expression "on the other hand."
Right.
I sort of wonder, ideally, how many hands do you have to work in your time?
Right. I'll tell you, these days that particular phrase is not thought of. They don't like us to use it, too much. But you make the same point, you say, well, this. I think I probably more than any. I especially, maybe more than some of my colleagues, maybe more than some of my colleagues here, since I am, just cursed with wanting so much to be fair, and I've been a performer. I know how hard it is. I'm the last person to say a pianist had a memory lapse or a singer cracked on some note. I would never even mention it unless it seemed if there were a lot of memory lapses, then maybe there's something going on here. But I probably use but and still more than any other critic. I'll say, yeah, still, whatever, I'll say, yeah, but, so we do that a lot. It does seem, like almost every review is a mixed review in a sense. I don't mean positive and negative. I mean, often a good example of pianist I revere is Leif Ove Ansnes, the Norwegian pianist. I just love him. Some people find him a little cool. Now, when I write it, in a way, the mixed I mean is that I'll say, well, it was a little, some people might see it's reserved, but for me, it's self-effacing. He's saying, let me lay this out for you. Let me show you how this piece works. With everything attended to, beautifully, musically. And then when he does pull a phrase of Schumann or something, it's overwhelming because he doesn't do that so often, so in a way, that's what I mean by mixed. I'm saying it's not this, it's this, that often an artist or a composer, performance might be a little wild, but it's exciting wild, so, yeah, it is. But I don't think 2 hands is probably enough to answer your question. Yeah. Yes, and I'll stop whenever you want me to. But yes.
How are your colleagues feeling about the pressures to use a lot of social media to promote your own reviews, to promote your calls, and to get your voice?
Yeah, I was quick. Personally, I mean, some of my colleagues just immediately just loved it, and I resisted for a while, although for several years now, the thing if I had talked about my work, I would have set up a video and show, because I have now about 30 of them, the videos I've made, filmed in my apartment, where the video crew comes and sets up, and just like Uncle Lenny, I sit down at the piano and talk about, my last one was a 16-minute video on what is dissonance, going from Bach to Gershwin to all sorts of stuff, and Schoenberg, and my first was what is 12-tone music, and I knew they were having an impact once I did a Google search. I mean, it's probably still just a random Google search. If you put what is 12-tone music, my video was the second thing that came up after Wikipedia. I've been loving making videos because the frustrating thing about classical music criticism, which I deal with and find frustrating every day, it never gets easy, is that it's essentially impossible to describe sound in words. And we fake it. We try, but it's just, I envy, everybody thinks their field is the hardest. Classical music is the hardest. It is, dancers, everybody's danced. Theater, everybody's been in plays. We know what acting is. But it's really hard to. If I use a term like chromatic harmony, maybe 5% of my readers really know what that means. And the thing that's frustrating about classical music is that you have devoted classical music lovers who go to the New York Philharmonic all the time are completely intimidated by the inner workings of music, and they don't know those terms and stuff. They hear it, but they don't know it the way they would in other fields. I've really enjoyed that. But now I'm on Twitter and I do all that stuff, and I'm not convinced it's doing all that good, but much good. But yeah, we all do it, and I think if you really don't want to, and you're a Pulitzer winner like Holland Cotter, that's okay, because he's so wonderful and respected and stuff, and probably doesn't have to. But I think most of us enjoy it, and boy, the Times is counting on it, to get our stuff out there. And I've enjoyed Facebook. I still don't get the point. Twitter, I'm actually finding fun. That I like. Yes. Change my mind, yeah. That's hard. I remember when Cecilia Bartoli came along, I thought, I don't get the big deal. She's a little pinched in her sound, and I don't know, a little too high energy. Then I got it. Then I started, oh yeah, it's really great. And now I'm coming back to my original take actually. But I don't know. I mean, the things that yeah, I guess I have, you know, I've been asked that a lot, and I always find it hard to come up with things because maybe I'm so much in the moment. And I'm also always trying to see, you know, like pianists I don't like particularly, like Lang. I have never reviewed him without trying to see, okay, let me see, what's going on here? What is he trying to do? You know, like, and acknowledging what's wonderful about it. And so, I mean, I think that's so much my mindset that I don't think of having a fixed take on something, and now I've changed it. But that has happened to me, I think. One more question, okay. Yes, go ahead.
You made this sort of hypothetical critic statement a while ago about this idea of presenting more new works instead of other works
right.
that potentially cost the same. And I was wondering what your actual viewpoint is on that. I mean, several years ago, the net got sort of thrashed by a lot of critics for the new ring cycle, which was so expensive and a lot of people are
right.
problems with, and you wonder how many new works could have been produced
with that money. New operas. No, I'm with you. I think that I think one lesson Gelb has learned, and I've pointed this out, is that if you're going to do a new ring production, or a better example, the new Eugene Onegin, which really is at best no better than the previous one, and in my opinion, not as good, not as rich, not as interesting, you know. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to do a new production, especially replacing one, you better really have something. There better be a good reason to do it. Like the Falstaff is wonderful, you know, that made a lot of sense, you know. And then you're better off just leaving the ring and putting that money toward commissions and new things. I'm with you. I think, you know, we would be, Kurt Mazur, whom I did respect, once I was interviewing him when he was at the Philharmonic, and we were talking about new music, and he said, yes, I know, you're right, we should do more new music, you're right, but this orchestra of all orchestras has such a responsibility to the major masterpieces of our time. It's our responsibility to play them at the highest levels, and Beethoven and Brahms, and I sat there thinking, you know what Beethoven would say to you? you know what he fought people, that attitude, all this, people like that were his enemies. You know, like it's just, that's not the climate, you know, that you want for the art form. It's not a responsibility to do new music. You know, it should be, and the one good thing about the decline of music education in the schools and the lack of, the one is that the new generation, they have no vested interest in anything. You know, so which means that they're open to anything. Like there are places like Poisson Rouge in the Village in New York, where one night, you know, some crazy rock band or some, you know, pop group, and then the next night it's the string quartets of Xenakis. Or, you know, or Caroline Shaw's, you know, vocal work that just won the pull, and the same audience goes. And they think, well, this is neat. Oh, this is pretty cool. You know, like, and they have no one's told them that Xenakis is forbidding and should be. It sounds like this wild, crazy stuff to them, and so there's actually an advantage, you know. The worst thing of music, and in a way I'm in the music appreciation business a little bit, but that can be the idea that you have to know the Beethoven violin concerto in order to understand the Brahms concerto, you know, in order to appreciate the Bear concerto, in order to appreciate the William Balcom violin, is crazy. You know, like it's not, music doesn't work that way. If I were to teach a music appreciation class in a college today, I think I'd go backwards. I'd start today. What are you all listening to? What else is going on? And go back, because that's the way we think of film. You grow up, you go to all new films. All new, then you finally say, this film stuff is neat. So you get interested in old things. Then you start finding out who Bergman and De Sica, when early Martin Scorsese and stuff like that. You go backwards. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. You know, once you're already involved with the field, you want to know where it came from. But So, yeah, I'm with you. Maybe I should write a column on that. Thank you so much.
I want to thank you for being here. I want to remind everybody, of course, that there are opportunities for the public to engage the Institute over the course of this week. Please check the Rubin website. We certainly welcome you back to the hall and other spaces of the building where you can watch the critics work with young writers as they wrestle with many of these problems. Thank you for being with us, and we hope to see you soon. Thank you.